Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you today. Very excited. We got Brooke joining us once again. We got Fran joining us once again. And while I am excited, y'all should be too. Make sure you like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays and Wednesdays with Goldmine. Now, today's topic, which I am very excited about, we're going to be getting into curating one's life. And so I'm going to get some intros, and then we're going to get into the subject at hand and go from there. So, Brooke, 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff.
Hey, I am a trauma psychologist that specializes in working with military and first responders, and I'm based in San Diego, California.
Bam. I like it. Fran, how about yourself?
Hey, I'm Fran Racciopi. I spent 13 years in the Army as a Green Beret in 10th Special Forces Group, and now I'm the creator and host of the Jedburgh podcast and the founder of FR6. And I live outside of New York City, where we saw the sun for about 10 minutes this morning for the first time in a week, and then we had an earthquake. So It's been a good day.
Sounds like a good old-fashioned New York day. What can you do?
Let's get it going.
Sean, how's life in the mountains?
Yeah, it's good. Really good.
Awesome. We got snow today. Again, we got about an inch and a half on the ground right now, and it's still snowing out here in Alberta. So it's going to be an interesting day out there on the roads, that's for sure. Now, the whole concept of a curated life, this started between a conversation with another friend of ours, and he was mentioning a podcast that we had that we'd put out a little while ago, where I had asked the panel, is social media is the world getting nicer? Is it making life, is life getting generally better out there, or is that just my social media? And everybody in the panel was like, no, that's just your social media. Life isn't really that way in reality. And I started to consider that, and I'm wondering how much we can curate our own lives like we curate our social media. How can we develop a really solid group of people or things that we do in our lives that really promote and, I guess, benefit us to the most extent without putting ourselves in an echo chamber, if that makes sense. So let's get your guys' first thoughts. Fran, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Oh, man. That's like he's taking it deep right off the bat. All right, here's what I hear. I hear you talking about choice. That's how I frame it. And when we're talking about curation of our life, so many times what happens is we feel this outside, this existential will that's been put on us to force us to do certain things. A lot of people, when they come out of the military, however long we spend in there, we almost forget that we have this thing called agency. Agency is our ability to choose what it is that we want to do. I'll call it choice. The reason why I call it choice is because we choose to perform. And yet at the same time, the choices we make affect our performance. But what drives choice? What drives choice is, number one, purpose. Why are we here? What are we trying to do? Why is it important to us? Number two, autonomy. Are we able to do those things that drive us, that we find purpose, or in a way that makes us feel good, and in a way that doesn't feel like someone is forcing us to do something? Okay. And then the third one is results, efficacy. Do we achieve the desired result of that thing that drives us, that we intend to do, in the way that we want to do it? When we put those three things together, that's choice. That's curation of our own life.
I like that. Brooke, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I second everything that Fran said, especially related to purpose. I think when we lose our purpose, or when we don't feel we have purpose, it's a house made of cards. And I also think that when I hear curating your life and the way that you described it, I think about values, building a life that's important to us, and then surrounding ourselves with the people that are important to us. I think that having a clear sense of what we value, and then engaging in what we call value-driven behavior, value-driven actions that are either working towards those values, accomplishing goals, right? But that goes hand in hand with purpose. Typically, if we don't feel that we have much purpose, or we don't know what our purpose is, we're not really in line with our values either. And therefore we feel kind of lost in life. So I would add on to what Fran said, with like a focus on values as well.
Absolutely. Sean, what are you thinking? You got to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Two words come to mind: intentionality and timeline. And so I think that you've got to have intention. You've got to understand that you're actually trying to curate your life. Here's what I've experienced is, and at 60 years of age, it's easy to look backwards and see this. When I was younger, I wasn't intentional in curating my life. When I just hammered, I just smashed, I just did things. I had experiences. I just went as hard as I could. But then when I got married, my wife, who's also an adventurer, we kind of made an agreement, almost like a pact, that we weren't going to let kids ruin our lives. And I say that like with a bit of tongue in cheek. I'm throwing a little bit of humor in that. But I think that's really what we told ourselves was we were going to live our adventurous lives and include our kids in our adventurous lives. So we intentionally chose not to let kids affect how rad we could live our lifestyle. And so we folded them into what we wanted in our lives. Our intentional expectations throughout life has had our kids in it. So we've designed things for our family. We've designed things for ourselves. We've designed things specifically for the kids where we've all been in it. And it's all been for a person or for the team. But it was an intentional choice, an intentional trip, an intentional overseas, an intentional adventure. So the intentionality of family life really dialed up my understanding of how to really focus on experiencing the most in life. But that doesn't become clear, or at least it didn't become clear to me until not too long ago. What I've been looking back over the last, my son is now 21 years of age. And the photos that I just put up this morning on my Instagram post, I could have put 1,000 photos up that reflected the timeline of kids from birth to now. But I just cherry picked some that showed us as a family in different locations, just hanging out. And the backstory behind the photo could be several days worth long. But no one really needs to know what the story is behind the photo. What we need to know as a family, or what I need to know as Sean, is that over a timeline of 20 odd years, I really truly understand how important it is to 20 years ago make a pact and say, we're just going to go hard for the next 2 or 3 decades with our kids and see how much life we can experience together.
That's really interesting. And I think I think I remember this conversation. I kind of overheard this while I was at physio one day, and one of the other people doing physio was talking to the physiotherapist, and he was saying, oh yeah, I want to make sure that I get to see this and I go here and I do these things before I have kids, because once you have kids, you'll never be able to do anything. And I remember thinking at that time that how crazy that sounded. Just like, why wouldn't you just take your kids with you? That doesn't seem like, but now this was right after we had our first son. So I was still woefully unprepared for what that meant to take kids with you to go do these things. So I love the fact that you brought that up, but I'm wondering, do you think that it's it could be a bit of a slippery slope to being so intentional that you almost put yourself into that echo chamber of the people that you're surrounding yourself with are just going to be consistently agreeing with whatever it is you're saying versus pushing you outside of your boundaries a little bit? I'm going to come back to you, Sean, on this one. What do you think?
Well, in regards to our family, fortunately, my wife is smarter than I am, and she probably brings more to the table than I do, and so she keeps it real. She keeps our fire team legit. So if I'm dropping the ball, she picks it up. If she's dropping the ball, I pick it up. So as a team, we work quite well together whenever we're trying to experience the totality of life. And so the example being that when our kids were, one of them was still in diapers, the other one had just got out of diapers, and we flew over to Vietnam for 6 weeks. And I distinctly remember we'd been in the country not quite 24 hours. We'd gone from Ho Chi Minh City up to another place called Mui Ne. And we just arrived in Mui Ne. So we hadn't been in the country a full day. And as I was walking down a back alley, a couple of local Vietnamese mama sans were walking down towards us, and they came right up to us, and oh, so cute. And they didn't really speak English. Of course, we didn't speak Vietnamese. They each lady took a boy, and the boys were like freaking young. And they were like, oh, cute, this is cute. And it was a cute little moment. Then the ladies turned around and started hustling down the back alley. I was like, what is even going on here? Where are they going? And so then they disappeared into a building. I was like, well, it's go time. I just looked at my wife and then Target. And off I went. And I went into this room and I thought, someone's going to get it. And it was just the ladies giving the boys some fortune cookies in the kitchen. And so that moment to me was the clashing of maybe I'm just letting things a little too free-flowy unfold in front of my sons. Maybe we're just allowing the world to interact a little too much with our open-mindedness or embracing of cultures. And so that moment to me, I've never forgotten it. Of course, nothing bad happened, nor would it have. But that moment to me is locked into my brain, not because it's shocking or scarring. It's locked into my brain because it's almost a tiny little red flag of you can embrace the world around you to such a degree where you're maybe embracing it a bit too much. And though that was well under control, I do use it as a point to remind myself that I shouldn't just free flow the world quite as much as I like to do. And so to your point, I don't really have an echo chamber because I don't really even have a chamber. My world is created by me, and who I hang out with is people that are good for me. But if I lose interest in what they've got to say, or if they feel like they're not authentic, or they're just not vibing with me, or I'm not synchronizing with them, I just move on. And I don't pump my fist at the clouds. I don't yell at anyone. I don't concern myself with anything. I just move along. Maybe we'll get back together in the future and see how that all plays out. But I don't stress these things too much anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Brooke, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree that I think intentionality is really important as well. I think we actually talked about intentionality a little bit the last time I came on the gold mine. But, basically, when we don't have intentionality, typically we're just going through the motions, or we're just kind of not being in the present. We're just letting life take us away. And so it's a big premise of a lot of the treatments I use, with my veterans and my first responders, is a lot of the work we're doing intentionally. And what I mean by that is, I'll use a physical example. If I'm going to PT right now and they'll have me do a certain exercise and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll like throw that into my workouts sometimes on my own when I'm at the gym. But one, I didn't really know exactly what it was targeting or why I was doing it. And two, when I'm really focusing on it, they're like, no, you should really be firing right here. This is where you should really be feeling that. And then all of a sudden that has a much different impact on how I'm doing that exercise and what it does for my body than when I'm just kind of going to the gym. All right, what am I doing today? All right, I'm doing upper body and I'm doing all these different things, right? And so I always use that in my own head when I'm going through my life, of thinking how important the intentionality of these things are, because if we set those intentions, or what we're doing for a reason, I think it has a much different impact than if we're just doing it because we have to do it, or because we feel like we have no agency, or because I know I have the tendency, particularly when I'm stressed, upset, life isn't going well, that I will just power through a day and I wake up, next thing I know, I'm going to bed and I don't even know what happened during the day. And so intentionality is always something that I focus on as well, to kind of ground me a bit more in the present.
I really like that. Fran, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw something out here and talk about it, and then I want to actually know what Brooke thinks, because she might think that it's not the right answer. But I think that I think it changes as you go through life, and what you have in your life at various points in time is you have different priorities, and those priorities then create a different intentionality. And so, Sean talked about having kids and talked about it before having kids. Um, I think all of us, right? Prior to having kids, you're in this. A lot of us, you're especially if you're super type A, and you're 11 on the dial of 10, and you're out there to have experiences and live life, and there's no danger out there. You're going to go after. You're going to get after it. And some of us, like I did, carry that on far too long, even after you've had kids. Which can have some very positive and very negative repercussions on your entire life, as those who know me have experienced and seen. So, what I believe is that we live our life in these series of chapters, and chapters, like in a book, are supposed to start and they're supposed to end. And we go through these periods where our intentionality, our focus, not necessarily our values, those always kind of carry through. It's like your character. Your character grows as you grow, but your values are kind of a grounding function throughout your life. But what you do, and what you're focused on, that might change. What your priorities are might change. Okay, and there are periods of time where you're focused on getting after it at whatever the cost is. And that can, the personal or professional cost, it doesn't matter, because your focus is you're trying to go do something. You might not even know what it is. And then one day that door is going to close. And then you're going to say, well, I learned from it, and I'm going to start this new chapter in my life where my focus and my intentionality is going to be different. And there's going to be threads of those previous chapters that are going to resurface in these new forward chapters of your life, because you learn from them. We learn that effective intelligence that I talk about, that makes you who you are and shapes your decision making. But eventually the current chapter is going to come to an end. I got three kids. Okay, and yesterday, when all three at one point were crying, and mind you, they range. There's like a 12-year difference between 1 and 3, so I was a little confused as to how we can all be crying at the same time. But that's the phase we're at. And an earlier version of myself, when my focus was different, would have been in that moment and wouldn't have been able to handle that well. But my intentionality, my focus, what I care about now is trying to, number one, make sure that these three stay alive. And then number two, create a strong next generation who's going to be valuable members of society. And eventually, I'll be upset about it, but they'll leave the house, hopefully. And then my focus will change again, and that new chapter will come. And so I think that we live our life in these series of chapters. The reason why I invoked Brooke's name at the beginning was based on the work that she does. For better or worse, I think a lot of us who come out of our backgrounds in special operations, at least for me, have handled a lot of our experiences that way, where we've come out of combat zones. We've come out of different experiences that we've had, whether it be losing friends and comrades or whatever it may be, and you can chalk that up to, well, that chapter's closed. And this is what happened, but I left it there and I moved on to something else. I think that works in some cases. I think for some people it doesn't. For me, that's been highly effective, I believe. Therapists might argue differently with me, but that's what but I think that's what we live. We live in this life of chapters. This life of chapters.
I like that. Brooke, you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I like thinking of it as or I like that view of chapters. And I do a lot of values-based work because I work a lot with military, particularly transitioning out of the military. And again, we talked about this when I was last on here, but the loss of identity and just really struggling with that, and talked about purpose and how values goes into that. And so a lot of the values-based work that we do it very systematically, but it's first talking about exactly what values are and how values and goals are different, right? I mean, so do we ever achieve a value? Am I ever just, if I value parenting, do I ever just check that off my list? Like, all right, I achieved that value, right? Their values are not necessarily something we check off, but the goals, those things that we do in the interim, our goals, our priorities, our actions fall under that umbrella. And so values, I actually do believe, change over time. Now, we can have some values, we call them value domains, that stick from in our whole life, right? Like I love animals. I really value taking care of animals and whatnot. I've been like that since I was a baby, and that's not going to change. But if we're even talking about parenting before having children, that's probably not really even on my list of value domains. Like I can abstractly think about, yeah, I really value parenting once I have a kid, but it's not necessarily something on my radar before I have kids. And then when I had kids, of course, that goes to the top of my list, right? And so typically what I have people do is consider how things have changed over the years. I mean, none of us right now have the exact same values, or I'll say the exact same level of priorities and importance on some of those value domains, maybe as we did 5 years ago, right? Before we had kids, before we got married, before, when we were in the military versus out of the military, when I was still, in my doctoral training versus now. So I think those things do fluctuate over time, and that's normal because our priorities change, because our life circumstances change, as do our values adjust to that. And so I think sometimes I run into a lot of my military and first responders almost feeling guilty or feeling, getting really down on themselves because they're like, I should still value this, my job as much as I did when I got, when I joined the service 15 years ago, but I just don't feel that anymore because I want to become a better father or mother or this, and just kind of normalizing that these things change, as do our priorities as time goes on. So I agree with you, Fran, and I like the idea of thinking about chapters, because the expectation that our life is just one chapter and that exact chapter for our entire life is obviously not realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, thoughts on this?
Well, I'm glad Fran brought up the idea of chapters in a book, because I was actually thinking of an encyclopedia set before you raised that subject, because that's kind of what I'm in right now. So the chapters in the book of kids is almost at an end, and now I'm into the next book in the encyclopedia set called retirement. And so there's small phases and there's big phases. There's small books and there's entire encyclopedia sets. That's what we're all in, is our encyclopedia set of life. And I just happen to be about 3/4 of the way through the encyclopedia set. And so I think that in order to curate your life, everyone's on point. You have to understand what point of life you're in. And once you understand what point of life you're in, then you've got to prioritize what is important to you in that phase of your life. And the tricky part is, if there's other people in your life, now you're balancing. It's a balancing act. You've got to determine what is non-negotiable for you and what is negotiable for you, and how best to negotiate that with whoever you're involved with in life, whether that's a partner or a friend or kids or your dog or your favorite sports car, whatever the case is. It's for you to figure out where to put your time in life beyond your, being a creative or a productive or a constructive citizen on the planet. You've got responsibilities, but you've also got responsibilities beyond those responsibilities, and they're to just live a freaking good life, be a cool person, have fun. And if you're having fun for yourself, it's easier than having fun with others. Once you start that balancing act of kids or neighborhoods or block parties, all of these things it gets murky as you get older, and as you get married, and as you get kids. It can all get really muddy if you're not using the right foresight to understand what's coming around the corner, what is important to me and the people around me tomorrow, next week, next year. And so you've got to I have to juggle my life so that Sean gets his Sean time and everyone else gets their Sean time. And that doesn't mean that I'm offering up my life to them as the Sean time. It means that I'm interacting with them. So however I slice up my percentage, if 10% goes to me and 90% goes to the world, you've got to think about your ratios, and they aren't locked down hard. They ebb and flow each day. And so to curate a good life as an individual or as a team in the now and 10 years from now, these are all different curated aspects of your life. I find that none of it will happen unless you're intentional. You'll wake up 30 years from now if you're listening to this, and you'll be 30 years poorer if you don't today sit down and think about the intentionality of what you want to accomplish over the next 30 years. It'll go by in a blink of an eye. The old saying is, you have kids and you blink your eye and they're standing up as tall as you are in a heartbeat. That's the way it goes. No matter how much you try to slow down time, it goes by fast if you're not paying attention.
Well, I don't think that you have to get it right. And I don't think you will get it right and get it perfect, though. And you have to be able to give yourself some freedom.
I should have said
to-
try.
Yeah, I mean,
Try.
but I think that there's gonna these transition points, right? Because I think the logical next question is, well, how do I know, right? How do I know when I'm shifting? How do I know when this chapter is coming to a close and when it's beginning? Some of them are going to be hard shifts, and I'll give a couple of examples. Like I always equate every time I deployed, I said I'm going to walk up the stairs to this airplane. Whatever happens on the other side when I get off stays there. And when I step back off the stairs to this airplane back at home, I'm closing that chapter. I'm closing that book and I'm moving on. Okay. That's a hard shift. I'll say that then I transition out of the Army, hard shift, sort of, right? Because now you're totally different. But now I've got kids. I had one kid at that time, but now I'm holding on to something that really in my life wasn't where I was. What was I holding on to? Well, I was holding on to what I thought I should have been doing the whole time I was in the military. And that was this 23-year-old version of Fran, who now at 35 to 40, was like trying to live this life of a 20 to 25-year-old, because I had this gap in time where I didn't get to do all these things that everybody else who didn't serve went and did, which is easy to do when you live in Manhattan, by the way. And it costs a lot of money. You make a lot of mistakes, but then you go through that. And then, I'll tell you, like one night, I was in LA working for the cannabis company that I ran. And I find myself in this club. And the other folks who worked at this company, I was the oldest one by about 8 or 10 years. And they convinced me to go with them. And I find myself at 1 a.m. and I'm standing in the middle of a club. And all of a sudden I look around and I realize this hard shift. No one in here looks like me. I'm like 10 to 15 years older than every other person in here. And the reason I asked myself that question at that moment was because it was one of those times where like everything slows down, everything clears up. The music's like pounding in my head, yet it's silent. And I'm looking around going, what the hell am I doing right now? And that was a moment where I said, dude, what is going on? Like, this isn't where you are in life right now. You're an I won't say elder, but you're now a middle-aged adult who has a family and priorities and an executive level position. And this isn't where you're supposed to be. And your focus isn't in the right place. And so I very deliberately turned around, didn't say anything to anyone, put my drink on a table and walked walked out through a door, straight into the women's bathroom. I'm not even joking. And then that's when I was like, "Yep, you're done." And I walked out, and I haven't been. And that was like several years ago now. And I was like, I have no desire to ever go to a club again. So maybe I will in Vegas at some point. But for me, that was like a defining moment where it was like you. And to your point, Sean, and the reason why I thought of it is because you talk about wasting time. I wouldn't beat yourself up about wasting time, because sometimes we have to waste that time, which is only wasted in retrospect, to actually understand where we're supposed to be where we're supposed to go and what we're supposed to be doing. And for me, that period of time was defining for me to refocus and open that and deliberately open that next chapter and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Brooke, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, one, I think that sometimes I'll say I have felt like I've been wasting time when I'm not living purposefully, when I'm not living in line with my values, when I'm just going through the motion and not taking a second to breathe during the day. I think of two things. One, I used to be a collegiate professional athlete, and I was homeschooled my entire life from the age of 4 to 22 when my body gave out. Was eat, sleep, train. I mean, I didn't go to school dances, I didn't go to sleepovers, I didn't do anything like that. It was 5 hours a day training. That's all I did. And I think I definitely got lost in that for a while, and part of that would be parental related, right? I mean, especially when I'm a kid and a teenager, like I don't have as much agency in that sense. But then the other stage is when I was very lost after forcefully having to retire due to my injuries. Is when then I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And that's when I started the road to becoming a psychologist, which took about 12 years of schooling and 80 hours a week of work without pay and all of that. And I have many times used the exact words when I'm upset of being like, I wasted my entire 20s. I mean, from 20 to 32, 21 to 31 or 32. And I'd be like, I wasted it. I didn't even get to live in my 20s. And, I've had to really grapple with that, and it still pops up sometimes. But I definitely think that although there were many circumstances present, like in the doctoral era of things where you're very overworked, you can't even afford to pay get your groceries, like, you're not treated very well in some circumstances, that I definitely was in no way living, even out when I was outside of that environment, I was not in many cases living my life in line with my values or with purpose. It was just get to the next day, get that done, get to the next day. I just can't wait. I just need to be done, and I need to get to this. So I think that, I do think it all kind of stems back to what we started off talking about, of the intentionality and of having purpose and values. Because even in really crappy times, right? Or like even in times that aren't necessarily fun, like if we have to go back to school to get a degree, or, we have a newborn that we can't sleep for weeks or months on end, that losing sight of intentionally trying to ground ourselves and doing things that we can still find some gratitude or value in our day to day, I just think is so important. I think without that, I think that's where the sentiments of, I wasted that time, I wasted my time. So those are my thoughts.
I like that. I wrote down here, when is a mistake actually a mistake? And so let me flesh this out a little bit. I was thinking about this, and that I have a shirt that I got from a friend of mine, and he put them out during the fall of Afghanistan when the whole debacle of that was going on and everything was going sideways. And a lot of vets from that area were like, what did I even do? It was a complete waste of time. Why did I even go there? Blah, 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 blah. But I look back at it now and I say, was it really a waste? Because the stuff that I learned there, the experiences that I gained from that, in the end goal of securing Afghanistan to a democracy or whatever it is that the end goal was for the higher ups, at the end of the day, what I learned and what I gained from it benefited me to this point right now. So when is a mistake actually a mistake? Is it when we don't learn from it and we make the same thing, make the same mistake again, or when we allow ourselves to wallow in that, or sit there and say, "Oh, I wasted all that time"? Is that the waste right there, when you're just sitting there going, "Oh, I wasted it," but not doing anything about it? Or is it more, making the same mistakes over and over and over again without any sort of assessments thereof? Fran, I'm going to come to you on this one. What do you think?
No, I think you have to learn from it. I think you have to say that, like, it's easy to look back and say I wasted the time. It's harder, and I think I would argue more important to look back at it and say I learned a lot about myself and from that period of time, because we have to make those mistakes. We have to do those things. I was not at 38, 39 years old. I was not going to not believe that I was 23 or 24 anymore until something drastic happened to me. That's what it was going to take. And I knew that. And I continued to play with fire until that event happened. And so, yes, I can look back now and put in my head, like, man, you're an idiot. You lost tons of money. You wasted tons of time. Like, my wife and daughter will never let me forget it and take every opportunity to remind me when they're upset with me. But I had to go through that. I had to do that, or I wouldn't be where I am today. And so I don't think you can look back. I mean, we all have regrets about things, and I think you gotta look at those things and say, like, yeah, but would I be here today if I hadn't gone through that? And so, can you regret decisions you made, and can you be remorseful and feel bad about hurting people in certain ways, and burning things down when you may have? Yeah, you can. But I think at the end of the day, you almost have to be a little selfish and say, well, look, I wouldn't be here now if I hadn't gone through these things.
Absolutely. Sean, thoughts on this?
Yep. Curated life. It isn't just you curating your life directly in front of your nose over the next day, week, year, lifetime. It's curating your life also backwards. So, to your question, Chance, when everyone's deploying overseas, before you deploy, what you should have squared away in your head is why you're deploying. Like, you should freaking know your why you're there, why you have freaking army boots on. If you're looking down at your boots and you don't know why you're wearing them, what are you even doing? And so you've got to have a why squared away before you go on a plane to go do something. Now, let's say you're overseas now and you decide, what? It's now 3.5 months later. What am I doing here? This doesn't make any sense to me. I'm disagreeing with it, or it doesn't feel right, or this sucks, or this is too much work, or I'm tired, or the food is terrible, whatever enters into your head 3.5 months after you've got off that plane. That's for you to figure out. That's for you to start asking yourselves those questions in that moment so that you get clarity in the moment. And if you're not getting clarity, it's now your command's responsibility and your peers' responsibility to make sure that the team as a whole is oriented towards what the mission directive is, whether the mission is a 4-person mission or a 1,000,000-person mission. It's for you to figure out where you fit into that, a constant, intentional reflection on why you're there and why you're going to be there tomorrow. You have to ask yourself these questions and you have to answer those questions. Now, let's pretend that someone's 3.5 months in and they decide, I don't belong here. None of this resonates with me. This sucks. I'm out of here. And worst case scenario, let's say they go AWOL. They just, I don't know, they walk to the edge of the sand, jump on a slow boat, and get back to North America months later only to be thrown in jail. And at that time, they get to reflect on the decision that they made. That is now collating or curating your life backwards. You now get to look at the last 3.5 months or 4 months and ask yourself, what happened? How did it come to this? Why did I make that decision? Where am I at right now? What lesson is in this? Before I got on that plane, I should have known my why, but I didn't. Once I got over there, I didn't know my why, but I didn't. Once I got on the boat to go back to North America, I had lots of time to think, and I didn't. Now I'm in jail, and I'm thinking about it. Now I am collating my life through a backwards lens of how not to do it, how to be more organized before I get on a plane, how to make better decisions before I snap out a decision thoughtlessly. Collating your life is forward, and with hindsight, you're collating your life as well.
I like that. Brooke, thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I made a note of what you said at the beginning, Chance. I was working in a combat trauma unit at the time of the Afghanistan pullout. And so, needless to say, we got pretty full pretty fast. And it was very heartbreaking for several different reasons. But I definitely came across a lot of that was what was the point? That was a waste. Me being there was a waste. And a lot of the work I do with them, one is, of course, validating the sadness, the grief, the anger, those types of things that they're feeling are understandable. So it's not a matter of like, oh, you should just be grateful for what you learned, but also helping them get to a point where we're working on talking about some of the things, that they did take from their time in the military when they were over there, things they learned about themselves, values they took with them, lessons they took with them that that are still, impacting how they're living today. Anything that they took from them from there that is impacting, them as a father today or as a husband today. But just also shining a light on that, as opposed to because that happened, everything is wiped away and it was a waste.
Yeah, it was a challenging time period for a lot of us, I think. And I just want to remind anybody that's watching, if you guys have any thoughts or questions, by all means, put them up in the comment section so we can engage those directly. Fran, I'm going to come back to you. Got any additional thoughts now that we've gone around?
Yeah, I started this conversation talking about these existential factors, right? And how we can often blame existential factors on the situation that we have. I think that this brings up almost like a double-sided coin, right? In one respect, when we talk about the situation, some like, the withdrawal from, if you want to call it a withdrawal, but from Afghanistan, we can sit here and we can say, well, look, like most of us are not in a position to be able to influence that anymore. And those decisions are being made by other people who are in those positions to influence it. And so, yeah, you can take that down. You can have that conversation at a strategic level with a strategic international incident. And I had that conversation yesterday with my daughter about playing time on her freshman lacrosse team. And, how do you increase playing time? Well, the coach, the other kids. And my point is, well, I don't care about the coach or the other kids. You want to increase playing time, you do something about it. We can take that now, go back up to the strategic problem, right? I'm a results oriented guy. I talk about taking action. I talk about overcoming limiting beliefs because I truly believe that we are going to be affected in our lives, for better or worse, every single day by existential factors that we can and cannot control. Those factors in our control, our health, our nutrition, our physical fitness, where we apply focus, all that stuff, we can make modifications and tweaks to those to improve how much control we have over our lives and how we respond to those existential factors. But when those problems get bigger, and whether your biggest problem is your playing time on your team or the time you spend with your kids or international policy, I still believe that if you want change, you have to overcome the limiting belief that someone else will take care of this problem, and you have to do something to take care of that problem. Because high performers, elite performers, those who succeed consistently want the ball when they care about the result. And it doesn't matter how big that field is. It doesn't matter how big that moment is, how big that problem is. Afghanistan is a very decisive topic. I've done a number of episodes on it, including immediately during and after. And there's a lot of people who will sit here and say this was a horrible thing. And it was. Don't get me wrong. I truly believe it was completely wrong. But there's a smaller number of people who stood up and said, I'm going to do something about it. And not only do something about it in the moment several years ago, but continue to this day to do something about it. So if you want change in yourself, in those around you, in society, take a stand. Go do something. That's my advice.
I love that. That's fantastic. I want to shift gears a little bit, but it actually plays into this quite well, is the fact that there was this recently, I was a little bit down on myself because I was thinking, there's so many things that I want to do. I want to be a good father. I want to be a good husband. I want to be a great podcaster. I want to be physically fit. I want to be good at jiu-jitsu. And you start to wonder about all of these external things and how much time that you give them, right? And same thing with Afghanistan or the news or whatever it is you can spend your time trying to fix or engage or develop or think about or whatever. And I want to ask you guys on the development of shifting priorities. So when I first had my son, and I was like, at the time I thought I'm going to be all in on being a dad, and I wasn't. I was still stuck in the whole, I was a soldier, I should have these responsibilities, I should have all these other things that, like, I had competing things going on in my head at the same time, and I wasn't as present as I am capable of being right now. And so I'm wondering what a correction. Let me shift this is, I'm wondering how to develop the ability to shift your priorities on the fly. So now today, my son is having his first sleepover, right, with a friend of his last night. First time I've ever experienced that as a father. I have to go all in on being a dad in that moment and just trying to figure out how to do that on the fly. But I also have a podcast coming up today. I also had jiu-jitsu last night. I also had these other things. And so what I started doing was engaging those things in the moment. So right now I need to be a dad. I'm going to be a dad right now. And as soon as I'm done being a dad in that moment, I'm going to go do jiu-jitsu. And I'm at jiu-jitsu, I'm doing that. And then when I finish jiu-jitsu, I'm going to be a podcaster and I'm going to start working on that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't learn how to do that just until recently. But I'm wondering, did you guys develop that skill set, or have you taught others that skill set to be able to shift on the fly? And what's the best route you found to do that so far? Brooke, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that I don't view it as much of shifting. I view it as integrating it all. So instead of me going from, like, obviously I'm very different when I'm on scene at a critical incident and then I go home and have to put on my family hat. But I try and not view it as like a switch where I'm like, okay, I'm the crisis responder here. And then, all right, I'm home. And now I got to like fully morph into this family person. So I try and see it more as an integration. And again, I always say this, but if it was easy, it'd be easy, right? Meaning that it doesn't just happen naturally. And there are many times that I come home and I am still in, mass shooting mode and have all that going on and still hyper vigilant and I'm, reacting in certain ways. And so I think it's, for me, to integrate these different priorities that I have, and that the priorities that I have involve me being a little bit different in each of them, is proactively planning out and thinking about things that I can do to help me transition into my role that I am in when I'm at home. Things that I can do to, in my case, get my um, get my nervous system down, get my stress response to start coming down. I have a lot of different tricks in my bag, or things that I do, that I have to intentionally put effort into doing. And they're small things. There's no drastic magic bullet thing that I do that just makes it all easy. But I think that's kind of tying back into what we've been talking about. But when I find myself getting into the most difficulty of integrating those things, is when I get in the go, 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 go mode, and days, weeks go by, and I realize I haven't even asked, my fiance, like, how his day was. I mean, quite literally, like, that has happened where I, like, haven't at least even remembered doing it, or even remembered caring if I did say it, right? So I have to make sure that I'm doing a bunch of different things proactively, and that I have a lot of tools in my box to actually use to help me do that transition, and that shift from my different priorities.
Yeah, I like that. Fran, you got any thoughts on this?
I have lots of thoughts on this. Jason Khalipa, CrossFit champ, calls this, as he wrote a book. It's called As Many Reps as Possible. And the theory behind a workout that's as many reps as possible is that you're all in on that one thing that you're doing. And then when you move on to something else, you have this hard shift into that next thing. I believe that does work. You're not going to be perfect at that. It's something I've tried to apply over the last couple of months. We as humans think that we're all amazing at multitasking, and we all suck at multitasking. We're horrible. We're horrible at it. When you're like, oh, I'm reading my email and listening to you talk. No, you're not. You're either not reading the email or you're listening to them talk. You're not doing both. Okay. And if you are doing them both, then you're doing them both poorly. So we can't be effective when we believe or we are multitasking, because we're not. So what does that mean? It means that we have to focus on that one thing. We may not get that one thing completely done before we shift to something else. We have to be okay with that, but we got to be able to do one thing. I did, many of you guys know, I did 75 hard to start this year, Andy Frizzela's program. And I truly believe that forced me into that mindset, because you have to do so many little things throughout one single day. And I had to run my security business, and I had to run my podcast. You maximize every hour of the day, and you find this time that you otherwise didn't think existed. But in order to get anything done, because you now have so many things that you have to do, you have to apply your focus on that one thing that you're doing. I finished 75 hard a couple of weeks ago, and I've continued portions of it. But even in the last week, I've tried to be more deliberate about, because Sean rightfully asked me before we started, where have I gone? Where have I been the last couple of weeks? And I said, we've taken a deliberate tactical pause in everything we're doing, and we're about to come in real hard starting on Monday with some big announcements and some, coming off the top rope on a lot of stuff. So, but in order to do that, I've been trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to refocus myself? How am I going to be able to achieve the results that I want to achieve when now I have to do more in my security business, in the podcast, in order to continue to achieve now a higher result than I have in the past. And I've put it in my head that when I'm doing this thing, I'm doing that thing. And there are very few things in life that are going to happen while I'm doing that one thing that require me to stop doing that one thing to immediately address the other. 9 out of 10 times we put it in our head that, oh, that email came in. Brooke specializes in anxiety. Okay. Oh, that email came in. Oh, I got to respond to that email. Do I really need to respond to that email? Because I don't know what the science is. You probably do, but I've heard, okay, this is this is very technical research here. I've heard that when you get into a task and you come off of that task, it can often take you up to 18 minutes to get back into that task. And so how many times do you get an email or you get your phone rings and someone's calling you or texting you where if you don't reply in that moment, there's going to be some negative repercussion? Actually, when you break it down, not that often. And so it's that anxiety and that spin of all those other things that are happening around us that force us to attempt to multitask and suck at everything that we're doing. When in reality, we have to cut that stuff out, focus, get something done, have that sense of achievement, and then move on to the next thing. Otherwise, you're going to spin your wheels like I've done over and over again, days on end, and go, I did a million things today and I didn't achieve anything. Well, I'd rather achieve 2 or 3 things today and have to figure out how I'm going to do the rest tomorrow. And go to bed at 3 in the morning and get up at 6 and you'll be good.
Yes, because 3 hours sleep is always a good way to start the day.
Just fill the cup. Fill the cup.
Just fill the cup. Do your best, man. That's it. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, quite a few. Yesterday, I put up a post on deep thinking, and I drew the comparison between fast thinking and deep thinking. And I'm not going to bore everyone in this podcast with what the difference between the two is. But the irony of it is, as I was writing that post, which was quite a long post, as I was writing it, I was deeply thinking about the subject of deeply thinking. And then I got interrupted in my deep thinking phase. And it took me several minutes to get back into my deep thinking phase, thinking about deep thinking. And so to your point, Fran, I don't know if it's 18 minutes. I don't know if it's 8, but it's something. And I don't care to be disturbed when I'm deep thinking. I just want to be left alone so that I can really, really achieve what I'm there for. And that is to think deeply. If you can assign some time for deep thinking and never leave fast thinking. If you don't drop down, it's almost like an elevator ride down that you actually lose a little bit of gravity to some degree. That's how I like to think of deep thinking. I'm dropping deep into my state of existence to consider things deeply. It's hard. And in my post yesterday, I wrote specifically that I do it twice a day, at least. Once in the morning before I do any microphone time, whether it's a live chat or podcast, whatever the case is. Almost first thing in the morning, I've got an assigned deep thinking phase. And then once I'm finished a podcast or my microphone time, I go ride my bike because my bike out in nature allows me to defrag. This conversation that we're having right now, by the time this is done, I'll need to get on my bike, not want to. I'll need to defrag what I've just absorbed through this conversation from you guys. And so once I've defragged it, then I sit my arse down on a tree stump, typically up at the tree of suffering, and I think about things. My second phase for the day of deep thinking, I assign blocks at a minimum twice per day. The rest of my day is fast thinking, my preferred default state. I apply pattern recognition, I apply instinct, I apply intuition, I apply action orientation. Probably a lot like Fran, we're probably default fast thinkers. That's what made us good at our jobs. The faster you can think, the faster you can recognize patterns, the more instinct and intuition you have, the more tier one-ish you become, in my opinion. Fast thinking rules the day in that game. But you need deep thinking as well. And deep thinking won't just fall out of the sky as a, now you get to deep think at this very moment. You've got to block these times out, I believe. So if you're not doing that yet, you absolutely need to. So for Brooke, you'd mentioned something earlier in the podcast about how you're going to PT or physical therapy and working on some sort of either a muscular imbalance or something is tender or whatever the case is, range of motion, doesn't much matter. What is interesting about that is as you go there, you're getting feedback. Like if you do the range of motion wrong, someone says, oh, just hang on a sec. This is the pathway. Glide it on that way. Or, oh, I'm getting a little bit of, oh, here's what you need to do. And presto changeo. It is an almost instantaneous feedback loop of whether you're doing it right or wrong. So in your intentionality moment where you're curating your injury, for lack of a better term, it's on such a short timeline that the feedback that you get corrects the moment. But that's not how a long time curated life acts. The timeline of 20, 30, 40 years, you don't get any instant feedback on a long timeline loop. There's literally no feedback loop other than several decades later, you look backwards and think, geez, I wish I would have done that better. So the feedback loop on long term barely exists other than long term reflection. And then it's too late. So the acute awareness of it's going wrong and the long-term awareness of it's getting or it's being done wrong are two radically different things. So now, Brooke, I'm curious with that groundwork laid, do you have any thoughts on the delta or the difference between sort of that acute and almost that chronic injury of looking at life as did I do it right or did I do it wrong?
What do you think, Brooke?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, so I like to use analogies or examples based on the body, because I think for me, and I know a lot of my first responders and military, it's easier to apply, mental health to it. In answer to what I'm working on, literally everything. I mean, I beat my body up for 30 something years and have several serious injuries, torn stuff that was never addressed. And then just everything that happens with that, your whole body gets really messed up. Right. So I think that, yes, if I look back now, I'm like, what an idiot I was. Like, the way I was beating my body up, there was never any focus on recovery. It was just go, 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 go. And so now I have a little bit more of a feedback loop to look at the acute aspect of it. But I think I kind of going back, I think is what Fran was saying too, is almost like I didn't know what I didn't know then, and I know it now, but what I learned through that, it makes me who I am now. So I also was thinking a little bit about what Fran said about focusing on something, and I fully agree with that as well. And if we're even applying the PT to it, I came into them and it's like a running joke, like, I'll be here a long time with you guys, because I had my back went out, my neck was not doing well. Then I also have a torn rotator cuff. I have a torn wrist that I need surgery on, and I have like a rotated pelvis and bad hips and all this stuff. And obviously, when I go into PT, they're not working on every single part of my body, every single session, right? They're like, this is where we're starting. We have to start with the foundation, which is your spine, right? Because we start there, and then we focus on the next part, and then the next part. And so to what Fran was saying, if they went in, they're just like, let's just focus on, do little things, one thing for every part of your body. Every time you come in, nothing would be getting better. Nothing would be feeling better. And so I do agree that applies to our day-to-day life as well. And I work with a lot of high overachievers, high achieving people, right? That tend to view success and tend to view productivity as doing as many things as possible. And the irony is they come to me so burnt out, so depleted, and they're like, how do I get back to doing all these things that I was doing, all these 15 different things at a time? How get me back to doing that, right? And they don't necessarily like it at first when I'm like, that's actually not what we're going to be focusing on, right? And that's what got you to where you are. That's why you're so burnt out now. So refocusing on being able to focus on one thing at a time and put our time and energy and intention on one thing at a time, instead of, hey, my measure of success, or my measure of doing things the right way, is doing it all at once. When someone needs me, I'm there. When someone emails me, I'm there, right? It's a very different perspective shift.
This is quite interesting. I just wrote down curating when required, but not so much when not. And I was thinking about this, was that I will curate, or let me rephrase this. At times when I was younger, I would curate my life when it was necessary. So like when I was in the military and they said, okay, you need to show up at certain times, you need to do PT, you need to show up, you need to do work, you need to blah, blah, blah. I could curate that no problem. But when there was no requirement on my time, I would just kind of let it slough off, or I would wait for somebody to send me an email, or somebody would call me and say, hey, I need help moving a couch. And I'd jump in my truck and be like, yeah, absolutely, I'm that guy. Up until I realized that we actually have to curate that time as well. And we have to be okay with not doing things. And I think, Fran, we had this conversation at one point, was the challenge of saying no, or the benefit of saying no to people. And that actually opens up all kinds of ranges for you to curate your own life, to be able to, sorry, can't help you move your truck right now, I'm meditating, right? to choose yourself first, or to whatever it is, to be able to engage that directly and choose not to always be on call for other people. I think that's a big part of curating your own life and making yourself really effective. Or to your point earlier, friend, when you said, I want to do two or three things well. I don't want to do 17 things half-assed. Just really work at it. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on that.
So you're
What do you got?
describing life curating you versus you curating life.
Correct. So when I was
Okay.
younger, life curated me for sure. And now that I've realized that that's not effective, that you have to actually curate your life to a high degree, much higher than I originally thought. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on maybe perhaps when you realized that, when you came to that conclusion and started changing your own life for the better. Fran, what do you think?
Well, I've not come to that conclusion. I would not. I would not say that. I think I still live in that. Like, I want to do 17 things. Awesome. And I think that's a really hard thing to do. So you got to manage expectations. You got to manage your own expectations first, right? If we can't manage our own expectations, it's very difficult to manage other people's expectations. It's very, very hard to say no. I don't want to say no to anybody, and I want to help as many people as I can. And I think the more that you feel that way, and the more you kind of think of yourself, as somebody who wants to be relied on and wants to be helpful, then it becomes increasingly more difficult to say no to people, because you'll just say yes to everything. In fact, my wife a couple of weeks ago told me, like, you need to stop volunteering for all this stuff. And I was like, well, I can't. And then she just walked away. So, but we have to, right? We have to figure out what it is. If you take the conversation back to our purpose, right, and you take that conversation back to what's our intention, it's very, very difficult to be intentional about absolutely everything that we set out to do. And I joke that you can go to bed at 3 a.m, you can get up at 6, but you're still not going to get it all done. And so then you have to be selective about what you're actually going to put focus and time into. And the metric that I always use is, and I remind myself that you make time basically subconsciously for the things that are most important to you. you're just going to do that. It's just something's going to come up and you're going to say, I'm going to go do that because that's what's most important to me right now. And I think if you look at your 17 things that you're focused on, and there's these 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, that always seem to be in the same spot and never really get anywhere. And then there's these few that seem to be progressing, but may not be progressing as well because you're focused on these ones that don't seem to be going anywhere. Then probably those ones, even as much as you might want to see success there, may not be a priority for you at this moment. Doesn't mean they won't be later, but that's where you start to look and say, maybe this isn't where the focus needs to be right now. And then cut that out and focus on the things that do seem to be moving forward.
I like that. Brooke, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, what I hear you guys talking about is boundaries. Ooh. It's I'll tell you, I think generally speaking with most of the people I work with, but also myself, I think the most difficult person to set boundaries with is me. So I always like to push my own boundaries, and it doesn't end up so well. So I think that you know, people. I'll speak for myself. I'm definitely that person who likes to get a ton done in a day and do a bunch of different things. And that person wants me, and I'm there, and then I do that, and I'm there. But it actually, when I am setting boundaries, when we start setting boundaries, and saying no, the irony is that not only do we feel less burnt out overall, but I think part of the reason why we feel less burnt out is not necessarily because that we're doing less. I think it's because it actually allows us to be there more for people that the things and the people that we really value. So, yes, if my friend asked me to move, help them move, and then I go do this, and then I go record that, and I do that, yeah, I'm there for those people, but then I'm not as much there for my family when I come home. I'm depleted, I'm exhausted, I'm not really there. So I find that boundary setting is something I do a lot of, focus a lot on in my work in the therapy room, at least. And I think that it is a very difficult thing. That's why so many people struggle with it, particularly people who are high achievers, prone to success, and have those type A personalities. Is very much difficult to set those boundaries, particularly with ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. Sean, thoughts on this?
Well, I got to first of all call out the guests because they're volunteering their time right now, just as Chance and I are. No one's paying us unless. Are you guys getting paid? Did you try cashing the check yet? So we're all volunteering our time, and could we use our time to do other things? Could I use this 2 hours to start designing the world's best frisbee? Probably, but that wouldn't stoke me. That wouldn't make me feel like I'm in the game that I want to be in. If I was designing frisbees, I'd be a different person. But I know who I am, and this is the kind of stuff that I like to do. What are we doing? We're serving our community. We're serving ourselves. And so, as we all know, after these kind of conversations, the microphone gets cut, and then you get on with your day, and then you spend a chunk of your day thinking about this moment, these conversations that we're having through these 2 hours. We're trying to deeply fold them into our life, or trying to tear them apart because that doesn't make any sense, and I don't want any of that in my life, or whatever we do after these podcasts. Whoever listens to these things, it sinks into your existence, and you have to make sense of it. And so, as far as I'm concerned, though none of us are getting paid, we're paying each other and ourselves, paying it forward, as it were. So I'm totally good with that. But I knew that before I hopped into this podcast. I knew what this podcast was going to be, and I know what it does for Sean, and I know what it does for my friends. And so I'm good with that. But if I was doing this all the time without thought, without intentional consideration of collating a life that I want for me and for my friends and for my community, well, I probably wouldn't be here. And so I think you've got to consider why you're in the game. not just be in any old game. And now to Fran's point, if you got 17 things on the go, the good news is when you're my age, those 17 things are way more manageable. Because when I was your age, 17 things were kind of difficult. If I had 17 pokers in the fire, I was burning myself from time to time. But then 20 years later, I've still got the same amount of pokers in a fire, and I know how to handle them just a little bit better. It just takes freaking time to not burn yourself quite as much. And I got all the scars from all the pokers. And it's just life teaches you how to do it well if you're doing your best. And if you're not trying to do your best, get used to being burned all the time. I think the timeline aspect that I mentioned earlier is underestimated in its importance. If I had 17 things on the go when I was 40 and they were all at about 25% ability or capacity, and I still had 75% to learn in each of those 17 silos, well, 20 years later, maybe I'm 80% on each of those silos. It just gets way easier to juggle silos when you can not quite see the finish line on each silo, but you have a way better sense of the totality of each silo. And it just gets easier. Intentionally actioning life with a long workload capacity behind you makes life easier. And the terrible part is that the moment that you actually start getting pretty good at life, you're almost at the end of your life. And so that sucks. But what do you do with that? You just freaking keep on smashing and work towards 95% on each silo.
This goes to a great point about the podcast in general, is the fact that we almost invariably, at the end of each show, we're usually just picking up steam and everyone's comfortable and everyone's talking. And then we'd go to the green room and we have extra developed conversations because now everyone's in the mode. And that's why we had to extend these conversations so that we could actually get into the weeds of them. Now I have, I guess, one kind of final question, because I know Fran's got a hard timing coming up pretty soon here. So here's the question. For those that are 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, who are just realizing, man, I've let the time slip away. What do I do now? What's the first steps, the first engagement? How do we get someone who says, oh man, I really want to curate my life, but I've never done it before. Where do I start? That's the question. So, Brooke, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
I think it's reorienting to your why, right? Reorienting to values. And it's normal. A lot of people kind of lose touch of their values, meaning, oh yeah, what exactly what's on my priority list right now? What's important to me? You can even find them probably on Google, but if you're having trouble thinking about, okay, what are my values? There's different worksheets that have they're called value domains, but it'll have a proposed list like parenting, social relationships, your marriage or romantic relationships, mental health, physical health. And then you kind of write down what you would like things to look like under those. And then they have two different columns. First, you go through and you rate each of those domains on a scale of 0 to 10 of how important it is to you right now. Right. So, and again, this is where we see if someone thought about how they'd rate it 5 years ago, these important levels would probably be different, at least on some of them. But you go through and you rate the level of importance. All right. I have 2 young children. Parenting is a 10 out of 10 for me right now. School, I'm done with school. That's nil. Right. Work is still really important. It's like an 8 and so on and so forth. Right. Physical health, that's super important to me. That's a 9. And then what you do, it's not based on just importance. What you do is then you go and rate from 0 to 10 how satisfied you are in each of those domains. Right now, how well do I think I'm doing in each of these domains? How do I feel I'm doing? How satisfied am I? And so maybe in work, I rated it a 9 and I'm at like an 8. and satisfaction. But in parenting, maybe I rate it like a 6. I'm like, I'm just feeling like not great in that area. So when you're done doing both of those columns, it helps you orient to where do I really need to put my focus on, so we have a little bit more direction. So we look at what's the biggest discrepancy here. What are the categories, the domains with the biggest discrepancy between how important it is to me and how satisfied I am in those domains. And then that's where we start working towards what are little things that I can start incorporating, quite literally, maybe scheduling into my week or doing to start working towards building up my satisfaction level in each of those domains.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Fran, what are you thinking?
So first of all, I want to do a Brooke, next time I come to San Diego, which I think we have a trip planned not too long, we need to do a podcast, the Jedberg podcast on
Yes,
what you're
please.
doing over there at the center. And I think that was an awesome answer. And I appreciate the PhD answer. But I'm going to give you the local union, local union pipe hitter answer. Okay, for everyone in my 32 BJ and all the other unions out there, just go do something. Okay, it doesn't matter what you do. Whether you find a goal, all right, because that goal doesn't need to be some lofty, change the world tonight, because you're not going to. Okay, if you're fat, guess what? You're not going to be skinny tomorrow. Okay, if you don't have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or kids and you want to, well, guess what? You're not going to have them tomorrow either. Okay, because you got to start somewhere. All right, if you don't have the job that you want, you don't have the money that you want, you don't have the life that you want, even if you do, but you want it to be better, unless you go bought the Powerball ticket, all right, which your life is still probably going to be difficult tomorrow, just differently. Okay, no money, no problems. All right, it is not going to be different tomorrow. So what does that mean? It means that you have to take incremental steps. And so if tomorrow the decision is, I'm going to work out for 20 minutes and it's going to be a walk, and I'm going to do that, and the next day it's going to be 25 minutes, and the next minute it's going to be 30, and in 2 weeks I'm going to go for a run, because that's what I'm going to get work up. That's what I'm going to work up to. Then do it. Remove limiting beliefs. No one's going to do it for you. There's no existential factor that's going to knock on your door and present you with a bunch of flowers and marry you. Okay? Get out there and do something. Take one small step, and then take another step, and keep taking steps until you look back and you go, holy crap, my life's changed. That's my advice.
Bam. I like it. Sean, thoughts?
Well, I do like the opportunity to disagree with Fran from time to time. I'm not really going to disagree with him too much, but I am going to tweak the language on it just for a minor degree, and I think that Fran and I will totally agree on this. If you're fat right now and you think that you're going to change that tonight and wake up skinny tomorrow, you ain't. That's called the external world. But within your internal world, if you want to decide that you ain't going to be fat tomorrow in your head and you're going to do something about it, well, your freaking world just changed. Your internal world is what changes the external world. If you want to try to change the external world without even understanding what your internal world is all about, good luck. That's called chance and happenstance. So you can make unbelievable, instantaneous changes in your life internally. But then you got to put action to the internal thought, and therein lies the rub. You can't take your magnificent choice that you just made internally that's going to change the rest of your existence for the better and manifest it in a split second into the external world. You just can't. And it's disappointing when that doesn't happen. You've got to understand, to fix your internal world, you require timeline in the external world, commitment to the timeline. And so however hard you want to work, that's on you. That's called velocity. And however committed you are to the task at hand, that's called your why. You can change all of that internally. You can maximize 100% where you're going to end up 20 years from now in your mind. but it doesn't exist until you put it into the external world over time. And so, as Fran stated, you ain't gonna go from fat to skinny in 24 hours externally, but you can do it in your head, in your soul, in your reason for existence by making it so freaking important that the fate of the intergalactic web space relies on you to start losing weight over the next few years. You'll freaking do it if you make it important enough. So you can change your world in a split second internally. You just got to action it in the external world.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you got a hard time in France, so I'm working. We're going to go through some final thoughts here. Just anything at all left over on the concept of curating your life, and then I got some comments here, and then we'll shut her down for the afternoon. But Brooke, let's start with you. Any final thoughts? Anything still rattle around in the back of your brain?
I really liked this conversation, and just to top off what both Fran and Sean were just saying, we do have a lot of limiting beliefs, and as a cognitive behavioral therapist, I mean, that's really what the focus is, and the idea is that doing those small things to get to that final goal. And I always use this example. It's like saying, I'm not going to start going to the gym until I'm in shape, right? I like, a lot of times we wait until we feel like doing it, or that we're really into it to do it. And I think that is a huge limitation. And so even if we're not feeling it, if we're depressed, if we're not feeling like we're in a good mood, or if we're using the example of someone, feels like they're fat and they want to lose weight, you don't have to go out and run a marathon. You don't immediately have to have a 6-pack in 4 weeks or anything like that. Just get out there, like you said, and go for a 15-minute walk the next day, right? Those little things, the cart follows the horse. So I think that those limiting beliefs of, I can't do it until I'm just like fully there, until I'm there. I can't do it until I'm already there. It really gets us tied up. So those are my last thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Fran, final thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'll have to go when we're done, but I got to go to a lacrosse game for my daughter. So we're talking about curation of life, right? We're talking about making choices and what's our priority, and we're in a combined volleyball and lacrosse season, which, for those of you who have kids, especially multiple kids, know that means that you have something every day, and nobody cares if you have to work. So that's what we got here on Friday. Curation of your life. That's about choice. Okay. I'll go back to how I opened it up. It's about choice. You choose to perform, and the choices that you make affect your performance. We got to wake up with purpose. We have to have autonomy to do things in the way that make us feel good about what we're doing. And we have to have efficacy. We have to have a desired result. Those three things, purpose, autonomy, efficacy, are going to allow us to make the right choices in our day to then drive our performance. And what we choose to drive our performance in the direction of is what will get us that result that we seek. And that's the curation of your life. And that's going to evolve over time. And that's okay. Don't beat yourself up. We're not supposed to get it right all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, final thoughts?
It's going to sound super cliche, but I do believe this is the way I've run my life for quite some time. It's just so happens that it started to become a quaint saying recently, and that is run your life like it's a movie, like you're the lead actor in your own movie. And it's actually kind of been spoiled to some degree now. It's said so often without much thought to it. I think that you get to live your life like it's a commercial, or you get to live your life like it's a frickin' epic saga. And so I'd rather be in the epic saga movie than the bit part in a commercial. And I think that it gets a bit distorted as to living your life like a movie, like an epic movie, is distorted into as if it's a selfish, narcissistic exploitation of the world around you, where it's all about you and living the best life that you can live, irrespective of all those around you. You've got to figure the right balance out for you and the people around you. But you should never hold yourself back to a bit part in a freaking shampoo commercial. Go live life like you're, I don't know, Braveheart or Darth Vader, depending on where your head's at. But go be a pipe hitter. Find the role for you in your life that you want to lead, and then go frickin' be a leading man or woman in your own movie. If not just for yourself, then certainly for those around you who are enjoying the show.
Yeah, and if you're going to be in an epic movie, choose to be Aragon. Just in general, that's a good person to be. If you're going to be anybody, be that guy. So,
I agree.
yeah, don't choose Boromir. I'm just going to give you a heads up. That's probably not a good choice. But the key thing here is that we all need to continually, every day, learn, build, and grow. And with that, we'll see you all next week. Chimo, everybody.
Chimo.